And we're in the home stretch. The final thing we're going to make is this carving image layout node, which is going to take these 3 images and it's going to allow us to adjust them and move them around according to what we need for our particular material. So we'll make a new substance, and we're just going to make this empty. And we'll come into our library, and again, we're going to be making this for input images, but we're going to use the black and white images as our test materials. And we're going to make them all grayscale. And the way we're setting this up is we're going to be putting material number 1 will be on top, material number 2 will be in the middle, and material number 3 will be on the bottom. And when we assign these, we really want to think about what we want overlaying other stuff. And I'm going to want this small one on top. So I'm going to now call this image 1, image 2, and image 3. So let's think about what we want to see happening to these images. I'm going to bring in a Transform 2D node, and I'm going to hook up image number 1. The first thing I want to address is the tiling mode. Let's put that back there. Currently, it's getting its tiling information from the parent. And I want to be able to have it have its own independent tiling. So the first thing I'm going to do is make this absolute. And that's going to allow us to change the way the image tiles. Right now you really can't see anything because it's taking up the whole thing, and each one of these is actually exactly the same result. But now we can see a difference. It's not tiling. Whereas it was under the parent, relative to parent rather, it's tiling. I can also make it only tile horizontally or only tile vertically. And if we come in here and click on empty function, we'll see that it's expecting an integer result. And that means that each one of these is an integer. So this is an integer drop-down list, which is what we're going to make. And we're actually going to duplicate this exactly as we see it here. So that's the first thing we'll make. The other thing we want to be able to do is, just like we did now, to be able to change the image's size in the X and the Y. And we're going to want to pan it. It's not tiling correctly now because the sizing that we have here, they're not whole numbers. But that's okay, because the whole point of this is that we're going to be able to combine images. So we're going to want to make some of them, we're going to want to be able to smush out an image and then decide, okay, we don't want that to tile all around. We're just going to want that image to tile, let's say, vertically. And then we can adjust it so that works for us. And by doing this to all 3 of the input images, we can combine them into a single new image. I'm going to get a brand new one of these. That means that the input parameters that we want to make are going to be our tiling mode. And because each one of these is going to be different, we're going to have 3 versions of each of these. And this will be an integer with a drop-down list, and 0 equals no tiling. Let's just double check and make sure we got that in the right order. So no tiling, horizontal tiling, vertical tiling, H and V tiling. now that I've got this set up, this is something I just recently discovered, which is kind of stupid on my part. We can actually copy this and then come in here and paste this input. And that certainly simplifies everything because all of this stuff has been kept for us. Let's start making some groups. So that's our tiling modes done. And next, let's take care of our offsets. And we'll kind of do the same thing. We're going to do one for each. And this is going to be a float too. And we'll set the default as 0. And I'm going to make it -2 and 2, and this way they can be kind of slid all the way off if we want to. And we can have pan X and pan Y. And we can copy these guys out. And that's our offset done. The final float 2 we're going to make is going to handle our transform matrix. So it's going to handle the size and the orientation. All of this information here, you'll notice there's no little function. Well, there is, I guess. But you can't really see what you're doing. What that transform matrix actually is a float 4. This is exactly the same information that we see here, just presented in a different way. And if we start changing these numbers, different things start to happen to our 2D image. And these 4 floats work together to do everything from sizing it to changing its orientation. And you'll notice how those numbers are moving around. This is kind of a tricky thing to get your mind around, so we're going to keep it simple. This X1 and Y2 deal with the size along the X-axis and along the Y-axis. And what this number 2 is saying, let's move that back to 1 for a second. This red border is our limits of our image. We're now fitting 2 of that image into that border. If we move this up to 3, we're going to get it even skinnier because now we're fitting 3 of those images within that border. So the way these numbers work is the larger this number, the smaller the image. And the same thing applies to Y. And if we do the same thing to both, we end up with a tile. These here deal with the offset on the other side. So they're we're not going to be doing a rotation. We're going to be changing its orientation. And we're going to stick to whole numbers here because it's just a little too complicated to do this all as an introductory thing to how this transform matrix works. But what we are going to do is, I'm just going to get a new one, it's quicker. What we are going to do is we're going to fix it so that we can change it by 90 degrees so that we can have our image either running horizontally or running up vertically. And let's take a look at what happens when we do turn it 90 degrees. So our transform matrix at its default is x1 is 1, y1 is 0, x2 is 0, y2 is 1. If we turn it 90 clockwise, we now have these numbers switched around. If we turn it in the other direction, those negatives are switched around. And you can, by trial and error, see exactly which of these corresponds to what. I'm just going to mark them down for everybody so that we'll see it once we start building this. But we need to create a function that's going to translate a couple of float2 variables into what we need as far as this matrix is concerned. And before we go in here, we've got our offset done. And we need to make 2 more input parameters. The first one we're going to call orientation. And we're going to make it an integer with a drop-down list. And we'll have input 0 as horizontal. And we'll have input 1 as vertical. And we'll make a couple more copies of that one. And finally, we're going to create a float2, which we're just going to call adjust. And I'll make our maximum 3. We can make a 4, because we don't want to get it too skinny. It's going to start looking really weird. But the bigger you make this number, the skinnier it'll allow it to get. And we'll set our defaults as 1. So we now have our input parameters that we're going to be using. And I just wanted to show you that you don't have to actually order them in your list, because they'll automatically be ordered by group when it gets published out. I mean, if it's easier for you to deal with them all grouped together, you can do that by moving them here, but you don't need to. We may as well take care of the quick and easy ones first. We have this tiling mode. So I'm going to set that to absolute, and I'm going to set image 1 tiling mode. We're not going to do the other ones until we're completely done with this transform node, because this way all we have to do is copy it out. The other thing we're going to do, which is quick and easy, is just apply that float2 to here. So image 1 offset. And now all we have left to deal with is this transform matrix, which is actually going to be something that we're going to have to create.